So today we're here to talk about the budget process for the municipal tax rate setting portal. We like to begin every training by going through the basic tax rate setting process. It begins with the drafting of warrant articles, which are a narrative of your proposed appropriations. Those are represented numerically in your proposed budget. Your proposed budget contains two key pieces of information: your proposed appropriations and your estimated revenues. Your warrant and your budget are brought forward at annual meeting. Any warrant articles that are approved are moved forward and represented on your appropriations as voted form, which is the MS-232 for towns, cities, and villages, and the MS-22 form for school districts. Estimated revenues are brought forward later in the year, where you have an opportunity to re-estimate them. Those revenue estimates are provided on the MS-434 for towns, cities, and villages, and the MS-24 for school districts. DRA calculates your tax rate by taking the difference of your voted appropriations and your estimated revenues. That's the amount to be raised in taxation. That's divided by the total assessed value, which is listed in the MS1 or the MS1V. After tax rates are set, the information is brought forward and represented on your final financial form, which is the MS-535 for towns, cities, or villages, the MS-25 for school districts, which is also known as the DOE-25. Today, we're just going to be focused on generating warrant articles and generating your proposed budget. So these are all the things that occur prior to annual meeting. Today, we're going to cover the drafting of warrant articles, either through the prior year pull forward or by drafting them from scratch, the default budget process, pre-review, calculating and submitting your budget, including the supplemental schedules for entities that have a municipal budget committee, and printing your budget forms. So you'll be able to select your annual meeting date when you first log into the system. Each year you'll be prompted with this first thing. And essentially what the system is asking you is to provide the date that you'll be doing your voting. So for an SB2, that's your voting date. For traditional meeting, it's your meeting date. The reason we ask that question is because all of your form due dates are driven from your meeting date. Everything's due 20 days after annual meeting. So it's important that you have the right date in the system. If you enter the wrong date accidentally, just email the customer support team and we can go ahead and correct that. So we'll talk about warrant article drafting a little bit in concept, and then I'll bring over the software and we'll do a live demonstration. When you log into the system, you'll notice you have no warrant articles created for this year. If you go to your budget tab, that's where you'll get your warrant article homepage. From there, you really have two options. You can import your prior year articles, or you can create new articles from scratch. When you start with your prior year information, it's going to bring over all of the language from last year, your line item details, so the actual chart of accounts that goes with each article, but it's not going to bring over the total amount. And we'll talk about why that is when we get into the software. Of course, you have the ability to draft new warrant articles at any point. When you do that, you'll be brought through the warrant article generator. It'll ask you to select a category, a type, enter your number and purpose, and then enter your raise and offset amounts or your appropriation and offsetting revenue amounts, however you want to look at it. And it will also allow you to preview the template language. So I'm going to bring over the application. Any questions so far? Okay, so now I'm logging into the application. I'm on my home page. I have a few different places I can go. I have different entities assigned to me because I have access to them for the purposes of demonstrating. For most of you, you'll default right to your general entity. So when I go and select the entity I want to work in, you notice that the schedule becomes available and it's asking me when I want to select my annual meeting date, or please select my annual meeting date. I'll go ahead and do that, and I'll say I'm having my meeting April 10th. And then if you note at the bottom of the screen here, we're in our budget forms and documents table. The due date for all of our annual meeting documentation is now set as 20 days from annual meeting. So I can go to my budget tab and I can start working on warrant articles. I can either select the budget tab at the top of the screen or the continue button to the right of the description here on the home page. Both of those will take you to the same place. Just like we saw in the PowerPoint, I'm in warrant article drafting. We see the header at the top of the screen here. We also have a warrant article table that will be populated as we create articles. We have two options. We can create an article from scratch, or we can import our prior year articles. I'm going to go ahead and select import prior year articles. The system's going to go back and grab everything from last year. Because for many of you, you have common articles year after year. This allows you to have a starting point, so you don't have to re-enter all of your information, just some of your information. So here we see now we have all 18 articles from last year populated. There are a few different things I can do at this point. Let's just say Article 1 doesn't apply this year. I can select delete. We can delete that article accordingly. So right away, we can go ahead and delete items as we need to, or delete warrant articles. We can also go into each of these articles and look at the information we have. I'm going to select my operating budget here. So at the very top of the screen for a warrant article, we see a few things: the number, the category, the type, the purpose. I can update my number and my purpose as I see fit. My language, which I can also edit. I can copy and paste text from another place in here. I have as well my proposed appropriations and my estimated revenues. And I have a total amount that's right now set at 0 for all these articles. And we're going to come back to that. Down below, we have a calculated amount. And that calculated amount comes from our account code table at the bottom of the screen. So for this warrant article, I want to go ahead and make sure that all the account codes that are being used are applicable. This is the concern when you pull prior year information forward. Obviously, your numbers can change, so you want to make sure those changes are reflected. And this will make a little more sense once we actually generate a warrant article from scratch. So I want to go ahead and create a warrant article from scratch and show you kind of how the natural workflow of the generation of the warrant articles. I'll select the Create Warrant button, and the system asks me to go through a step-by-step series of questions. The first one being select a category. So I'm going to select an individual article, and then I have different types available to me. Of course, other is always an option if I want to use it. I'm going to select equipment purchase. I'm going to enter a number and a purpose. I'm going to enter a recommended appropriation or not recommended appropriation, depending on what the scenario is. In this case, it is all recommended, and we believe we're getting a grant with offsetting revenue for the purposes of purchasing this truck. In step 4, I can see my preview language, or it's letting me preview the language, excuse me. This essentially shows me what the system will pre-populate for me. I can go ahead and edit it on the next step, but at least it gives me a chance to see it. When I generate the article, I will see right now at the top of the screen all the information I just entered, plus my recommended amount and my estimated offsetting revenues. So typically, if I was creating an article from scratch, the first thing I would do would be to come in here. I'll enter the language that I want to use, and then I'll go to the account code table at the bottom of the screen and actually go ahead and justify the total that I entered up top. The reason that this background is red right now is because the system is saying this information does not match. You've declared that the warrant article is a total amount of $55,000, but you haven't justified what account code that $55,000 goes to. So I know I want to go to my Appropriations Capital Outlay tab, and in my Machinery, Vehicles, and Equipment, I'm going to put $55,000. This entity happens to have a municipal budget committee, so I'm going to enter that as well. I'm going to select the Recalculate link. Now when I scroll to the top of the screen, you'll see that our proposed appropriations now match. The system is saying you overall made a declaration of $55,000 and you justify that in the account code table. We'll also want to go ahead and do the same thing for our offsetting revenues as well. I'll go to my Revenues tab. I'll go to State Sources, and I'll say that it was a block. Now you can see we have a match up top. This warrant article is good. That's all we need to do to create an article. So the reason I wanted to step aside and show that example is because when we bring our prior year information forward, the top declaration amounts are zeroed out. And that's to make sure that all of your warrant articles do not match by default that are brought forward. You'll have to go ahead and make any adjustments as needed. We will go move on to the next step, pre-review. So pre-review is an optional process that DRA provides where you can send your information into them and ask DRA to go through your warrant article language, your account code breakdowns, and basically what they're doing is a preliminary review that will allow them to understand what you're trying to do at annual meeting. And this can help, with language issues or maybe funds that aren't broken out correctly. It's just really another set of eyes on your information prior to annual meeting. So DRA asks that you don't request pre-review until you've drafted all your warrant articles. So once you've gone ahead and drafted them, you can select the request pre-review button. At that point, your advisor will be notified that you've requested pre-review. They will go ahead and review all of your information, add comments, or mark the articles as not having any deficiencies. And when they're done with their review, you'll receive an email notification telling you it's time to go in. Essentially, each of their pre-review comments is just a thread on each warrant article, and you can go and have a correspondence with them as well. You can reply to their comments and go back and forth. We'll go back to Sutton, back to our budget home. Imagine I've gone through and filled out all my information, and now I want to go ahead and request pre-review. All I do is go down here to the bottom of my account code table, or excuse me, my warrant article table, and select the request pre-review button. When I do that, my advisor gets a notification, and at this point, I just have to sit back and wait until I receive word via email that they've completed pre-review. I have an entity I already went ahead and pre-reviewed yesterday, so you can see what that's like. So once I receive the email that says pre-review is complete, I can log into the system. The first thing I'll see on the screen is that the pre-review checkbox is selected. I can go to my budget homepage, and I see a few different things now going on in my warrant article table. Number one, I see this envelope icon. If I hover it over it, it'll say there are unread comments available to view. And then I have a green check mark telling me all my comments are complete. Some articles have a yellow indicator that says one or more comments still pending. So essentially what DRA is going to do is go through each article, and even articles that have no issues, they're going to mark them as no deficiencies noted. So you're aware that they've gone through and reviewed that article. The unread message icon is just like in your email. This is basically telling you you have a message you haven't looked at. You have two options. You can mark it as read, or you can reply, or I guess really three options. You can just ignore it altogether. If you mark it as read and go back to your home page, just like with an email, it'll be gone. You won't see that indicator anymore. We could go back and mark it as unread as well if it was something we wanted to return to later on. More importantly are the warrant articles that have the yellow indicator on them. If I select any of them, I can see comments from DRA now. It's not just saying no deficiencies noted. It's going to say language change. Potentially break out my ordinances as bullets. And now I can mark it as read. I can make the change to the article if I want. I can reply back to my advisor. Now my advisor will receive an email saying I've asked a question about a pre-review comment, and then they can write back to me, and all that information will be logged in the system, and this conversation can keep going on. Note when your advisor sends you a reply, you will get an envelope icon that will reappear saying you have an unread comment. Okay, default budget. Default budget is for SB2 entities. What should be in your default? All of your operating budget warrant articles and your individuals that are CBAs. You should not include any other types of individuals. If you've used the other designation in your warrant article type, it will not pull, the system will not pull it in. You'll have to manually enter that. The default budget screen, you can see here, it will bring in all of your prior year information. You can enter your reductions or increases or your one-time appropriations. It'll automatically calculate your new default, and you have the opportunity to enter any reason you need to. You can view your default budget form and submit your information. Your default budget report will have a watermark on it until it's submitted. Your final copy of your default budget should also be signed and attached in the forms and documents table, and we'll talk about that a little later on. Because each warrant article automatically ties itself out or is required to be tied out by the operator, meaning you have to justify the total appropriations and estimated revenues, we can guarantee the math while you're going through the submission process. The default budget doesn't have that type of check, so we require that you submit your default budget before you submit your overall budget. And it's pretty straightforward. I'll jump into the software and show you how it works. So I'm going to go to Alton, where I've already prepped this, go to my budget home. You can see I have a ton of warrant articles. And all of these warrant articles in the far right column have the raise offset match set to true, true. What that means is that I've tied out my information on each article. If, for instance, I went ahead and changed this to 10,000 and saved it, I'd get a false in this table. And what this is telling me is that I didn't match out my appropriations. So if I type in false, I can see everywhere where I had an issue. So in this case, I'm going to go back and correct my warrant article. My default budget is always going to be set to false because there's no math check we can do. So essentially, that's why we require the submission prior to submitting your actual budget. So I'll select my default now. You can see all of my prior year adopted information. And I can make any reductions or increases. I can make any one-time appropriations I want, and I'll land on my default budget. So in this case, let's say I want to reduce this by $66. I can hit save and recalculate. My default budget is adjusted. I can say rounding error last year. A few different things I can do at this point. I can obviously save that information I just entered. I can view a draft default budget form if I want to. It'll have the draft watermark on it. I can export it to a PDF. See all our information. I could submit. I can select save at home, and I can come back to it later. But I want to walk through the submission process. So I'm going to go ahead and select the submit button. Once that information is submitted now, we'll have a true match down at the bottom of the page. Okay, we'll talk about printing your budget now. At any point, you can print your budget by going to the View Budget Report button. The first time you go ahead into the system and you want to print the budget, you'll have to select the View Calculate Budget button first. That will actually aggregate all of your warrant articles together. So anytime you make changes to a warrant article and you want to see it reflected on your report, you want to go to the View Calculate button. It'll take you to this page which shows you a summary budget. And essentially your summary budget is just all of your different warrant articles aggregated together into a much larger budget, or your actual budget document. If I go back to my budget homepage and I want to view my report, you can see my 737. It has a draft watermark on it. That draft watermark indicates that this budget is not final and hasn't been submitted through the system. Once it is submitted through the system as an official budget, that draft watermark will be removed. When we want to submit our budget, we'll go ahead and go back to our budget tab. We can go to the View Calculate Budget button at the bottom of the screen. That's going to once again calculate all of our warrant articles and create an aggregated budget. The system is also going to ask us to enter our actual prior year expenditures. So for those of you on calendar year, that you do your fiscal year coincides with the calendar year, you won't really have all these numbers completed yet unless you've already got your MS 535 done and your auditors are complete with their work, which is not typically done at this point in the year. What we ask is you just make your best guess at the information or your best estimation at this point, understanding that the numbers aren't fully audited. If you're on fiscal year, this would be 2 prior budgets ago that you'd enter this information for. So once I've entered everything, I can go to step 2 and finalize my budget. If I have a municipal budget committee, I will be asked to go through the supplemental schedule form. If I don't have a municipal budget committee, I won't see this page, and I'll actually just go right to the finalize button, which we see here at the bottom of the screen. If you do not see a finalize button when you get to this step, it means you don't have the right user credentials to do that. You'll want to talk to whoever administers the system in your town, city, village, school district. When I select finalize budget, my information will be submitted to DRA. I'm now in the appropriations phase, I can see up top. And if I run my budget now, you'll see that the watermark has gone away and I no longer am in draft. this is essentially an official budget that I can go ahead, print, and post. Okay, we talked about submitting. So the last thing is the forms and documents upload table. On the home page, there are a number of different documents that you'll have to submit around annual meeting or after annual meeting, including your budget is posted, your minutes, your 232. All that information appears in the budget forms tab on your home page. You can upload any documents that are needed. Any system documents like your default budget and your 737 are automatically logged as reports, but the signed copies that DRA requires will have to be scanned and attached. In closing, your DRA advisor and the municipal supervisor are great resources. You can also at any point click the help button in the upper right-hand corner of the application. It'll take you to the help page where information is broken down by topic. So for instance, I could go to proposed budget, and then I have all these different, what we call articles, including, say you want to look at importing prior year articles. There's a step-by-step process, and then there's also a YouTube video that'll walk you through what we did today as well. So all this information is available to you once again by selecting the help button in the upper right-hand corner. Please feel free to reach out to the technical support team. That's also accessible by selecting the help link. You'll have access to log a new support desk ticket or make a phone call. Thank you all very much, and if you have questions, please feel free to reach out.